Hello and welcome to ELT Under the Covers Crumbs on the Sheets, where we take a broader look at the education, learning and teaching industry community, and we go a little bit more in depth into topics that are on our minds and have been suggested by you, our viewers. But first, introductions. I'm Neil of NeilTEAcher.
Hello everybody, it's ProfesorRich back with another one of those block rocking crumbs on the sheets.
So we're back with another one of those block rocking crumbs on the sheets, blocks on the sheets. So what have we been eating?
Actually, it probably does it roll off the tongue? How do those crumbs get on the sheets? That's the question.
I think that's for after Watershed when we talk about that. So today we're going to be kind of doing a little bit of a follow-up, as many people that have been following will know, and those that are new, my family transitioned from Canada to the UK last summer, which meant that my eldest went into reception, which is I don't know how you would say what that would be the equivalent of in Canada or like the America, because it's not quite kindergarten, because it's not, but it is school, like it's paid for by public
How is it
funds.
not kindergarten?
Well,
3 years old?
Kindergarten, I think, is actually like year one. I'm over here.
Oh.
But it's kind of
So
like
how old is kindergarten?
kindergarten.
Like
Yeah. So I think it's like if any Americans are listening, that kindergarten is kind of like kindergarten light stroke preschool. A lot of the stuff that would there is maybe covered in daycare. I'm not entirely sure. But basically, he does go to a school. It's a publicly funded school. He goes there, for the full school hours. And in the UK, we call it reception. And I don't know if you remember initially what I was telling you about, that their focus is on social, emotional kind of like education, and just kind of helping kids adapt to a school environment, but with less pressure on actually education, learning. There's no grading really or anything like that. And
It's just probably reasonable to start off with.
yes,
I know
I think
some
so.
of my British friends were quite shocked when the 3-year-old who entered the Spanish public school system, because you can enter at 3 in Spain. You don't have to, but you can. Was basically being taught like maths and like sort of right or wrong maths,
Right.
and they were saying like, oh, he doesn't have the development he should have, he can't do like 1+1 or whatever, and they're like, he's 3 years old, what are you talking about? You should just be playing games. Like, what's going on here?
This is actually something that is something that I want to talk about, because one of the things that I do want to say up front, that I am hugely proud of my eldest, because in Canada we couldn't afford a lot of daycare, nursery care, so he would just go like twice a week, and coming over here was a big transition to going full time, and he's done exceptionally well. Very, very proud of him. He is really young though, and I think that is a disadvantage. He's got friends that are 5 years old, the other end. And I remember when we first started to kind of like meet some of the kids from school, and they spoke so well and so clearly, and like he was just kind of getting his, he speaks fine, but there was a big difference in kind of like the grading, I feel, of the language. And I noticed with other kids that was his age, um, I think there's a big difference between a 4 and 5 year old as there are between like a 2 and a 3 year old. You know, there's leaps and bounds to it. Um, and he's had a little bit of trouble, and the trouble is not from the education standpoint per se, but because he's still really young. So he just, he's not had a background so much with daycare and nursery, so he just wants to play, and he's really good at like building up with blocks and creating tracks for his Hot Wheels and stuff like that. But he's still kind of getting used to socializing, dynamics of that, sitting down, eating at, like in a in a in a like the school format or whatever,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and that impacts the education side, because when they started to kind of introduce towards the turn of the new year, introduce phonics and reading and stuff like that, he, like they would ask him to read, sit down and read, and sometimes he wouldn't want to do that, and they're like, well, sometimes it's difficult to get him to sit down and read. I'm like, well, he doesn't.
This actually does sound like the similar kind of things that I heard from them,
Yeah,
my friends.
I'm like, well, he's 4, and we read every day. Like I read every night with him. He reads throughout the day with like his mom. Sometimes he'll read before school, sometimes he'll read after school, because he gets books from the school, which is fantastic as well. You get a free book like every time you ask for it. It's like a library, so you send it back. And he loves reading, and he loves kind of working things out from pictures and stuff. But if he doesn't want to do it, he won't do it. And at school, you have to do stuff per kind of the teachers. Yeah, and you don't want to do. So it kind of there's a grating element to it. And I just, the thing that kind of came up to me, I'm like, well, how much do we take into account the development of the kids versus like just body wise, mentally, emotionally, versus how that is matched up with what they're being taught. It's done very differently across the world. Like kindergarten starts, I looked it up, United States 5 to 6, Australia 5 to 6, Scandinavian countries, which I think is really interesting, which are some of the best well read. We're talking like Finland, which I think I've harped on about before. They start age 6 or 7 is when they start doing like phonics awareness kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't.
That's interesting, isn't it? You mean they read very well in Finnish and Swedish?
Yeah.
The kids they read early.
Yeah.
And are those languages phonemic? Naturally.
I don't know.
They don't
But
look it, do they?
that's when they start it.
That's interesting. So they start at 6 or 7.
One of the things that we've had when we've talked with some of his teachers at school is they don't want him to. We got like marks back of kind of not like just kind of their assessments of how well he's doing, and he's middling. But some of the comments that we had back were saying that because they're having to try and kind of corral him to do stuff, that they don't want him to have a bad experience with school. I'm like, but that's not, it's kind of trying to force him to do something that he doesn't want to do, that's going to give him the bad experience.
What don't they want? What I don't quite understand. They don't want him to have a bad experience with school, and what are they concerned about?
Yeah, they're concerned that because he if he will get a bit frustrated sometimes with writing and he won't want to do it, or like with reading he doesn't want to do it at a certain time, um, and
Right.
but they're having to try and get him they're having to try and get him to do it at this particular time, that
Right.
it's going to create like a negative feedback. You know what I mean?
Okay. And what's their proposed solution for that?
We didn't really get to one, because it's
Oh,
kind
so
of
they were
like
just like,
they're like,
we tell him to do something, he doesn't want to do it, and we're worried that this is going to give him a negative experience at
yeah,
school.
no, yeah, so because I think in
Okay.
their mind they're thinking he's going to go up into school next year, and then there's going to be bigger consequences for going for not doing work or whatever. You know what I mean? So I get the
Yeah.
feeling that they're like, oh well, then he's going to start to be punished for not doing work because he's in a habit
Uh-huh.
of saying no, I don't want to do it. Do you know, like they've set
Oh,
up a bad
okay.
habit or something like that? Um,
Okay.
and I understand their concern. I think that's kind of where they're going with it, but I don't think it's anything that really that you can change apart from him starting school a bit later where he's a little bit more mature, and the ball's
Uh,
already rolling with that.
yeah.
Yeah, you see what I mean? But
Yeah, I
he's really
mean,
good with his letter. But with when we're talking about phonics, he's great with letters, or identifies all the letters. He actually finds it quite interesting. Like he learned about diagraphs the other day,
hmm.
and he goes around noticing them and he points them out. So I like this idea of
Oh,
phonetic awareness, but
yeah.
because
Phonic awareness.
sorry, phonic awareness,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he gets frustrated if he's trying to read because sometimes the words are really difficult and you help him, and but the maturity level is not always there. He can get frustrated, and he sometimes it finds it hard to regulate, which we're working on all the time. But I think it's a thing that comes as you age with more experience. And my thing, and why I kind of go back to the beginning, when I see these 4 year olds and the 5 year olds, there is a big difference. And I think often it's just because the 5 year olds have just got a year more experience of like being in situations dealing with frustration that they're able to apply to their learning.
Yeah. The I want to talk about phonics,
Mm-hmm.
but before we get onto that,
Mm-hmm.
just going into this behavioral issue, because obviously it's a big deal, isn't it? When do you put your kids in school? This is massive for parents.
Mm-hmm. And you can
And I would
actually
look
delay as well. That was something that I was
right.
contemplating because he's a summer baby as well, and summer babies
Yeah.
you can delay,
To the next
to
year.
the next year. And I
Yeah.
was like, he's he's mature, but I'm not. Is he enough to go to school? But there was also other factors of us being back here, of like if he's not going to school, Fanny's juggling two kids really young, being in a
Yeah,
new
that's a big
country.
deal, isn't it?
So
Yeah.
there's no good avenue out there that we could
Yeah.
afford. But
Yeah.
there's definitely evidence and research out there that summer summer babies are at a disadvantage. That's why they have these new schemes, and there's some really
Yeah.
interesting literature around it. Even we're not even talking education per se, but I remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. I think it was in Outliers where he talked about just uh, these kids in Canada that were I think it was in Canada that were going to do hockey, and those that got like drafted into their school teams and stuff like that, they just all happened to be those the older kids. They were the bigger kids. It was these kids that were born at a certain time of year, time and time again, and they found this pattern. This guy found this pattern of it, and when they contrasted that with something that they do in the Australian swimming leagues that they have for kids, where they tracked students, but they also added like a handicap on their swimming times based on kind of their age, and they determined that, well, this kid is actually doing really, really well, even though he's like bottom of, or like lower end of the rankings, when he's going against his peers, but he's like a year younger. And if you were to just give him, when he gets that extra year, when he goes and finally gets to the year or the age that these other kids were at, you would actually find he would be better. So this whole idea was there was lots of people slipping through the cracks because the metrics don't really accurately analyze and take into account different stages of development. It was all very interesting, and it had me pondering a lot with having my eldest going to school.
What's just give me the upshot of that, because I didn't quite follow it. Is it the idea that holding someone back can be beneficial?
Yeah.
And you were referencing specifically something about hockey players?
So with hockey players, it was they found that those that went into their school team, then went on to become professionals and stuff like that, they all kind of fell within this specific age bracket.
Right.
And that age bracket was, they were more physically mature, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were more skilled. As you know, with sport, often, especially with like something like martial arts or whatever, you could be very skilled, but just because you're like that little bit bigger, that could offset that skill.
Oh, so is it like what the kids that are kind of a bit older would tend to get chosen for the hockey team,
Yeah.
and then because they're chosen for the hockey team, they end up being the kind of ones who are better at hockey as well?
Well, that they end up having more opportunities to go on to actually play hockey professionally. Whereas
Right.
when I'm talking about with the Australian swimming leagues stuff that they were doing, they kind of noticed this trend, and they were trying to find a way to actually focus on techniques. So how are they doing? How is their skill level, regardless of their development? And then they kind of matched the skill level to that stage, and then they're able therefore to kind of grade it and give like handicaps. So if you had to have a 4-year-old and 5-year-old race, they were able to give the 4-year-old kind of a handicap, but then they could match the times, so they could still race together, and they would say, oh, okay, so this kid actually has a better skill level than the older kid. But the older kid, if you were to use the old metrics, he won. But it's based on the physical development, less
Physical
so
maturity.
there's no skill.
Right. Okay. So the upshot of this in deciding whether to put your kid into school earlier or not is sort of, it's the biological, like what biological factors are coming into play, which may cause the schooling experience to have some sort of negative impact. Whereas if they'd started school later, they would take to it more.
Yeah, or they'd have I keep coming back to the word maturity. They have the maturity to, be able to sit and listen, to be able to regulate themselves
Right.
better, to deal with the inevitable frustration that comes with learning.
Yes, but we're saying that that is
And that's the
uh, it's
advantage.
it's biological,
Yeah,
that there's some sort of, yeah, psychological natural development which happens, and at a younger age they might not have it. They go in, and then, as expressed by your school, there's the potential to create some sort of negative feedback loop.
yeah. So think about it. You you go into a school or something that you're trying to gain a skill for, um, and and automatically you're kind of at a disadvantage because you don't. It's like trying to uh, learn to run track before you're physically able to walk. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
by doing that, you're like going, well, I can't walk. I can't do track. And you're like, no, you can't. It's not
Uh-huh.
that you can't do track. It's just that you just don't have that development to be able to do it at
Uh-huh.
that stage.
I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I see.
And therefore, they kind of get a limiting belief that I'm bad at whatever. And I think this bleeds into a lot of things as well. Like a lot of people think that they're, bad at maths or bad at English or bad at languages, and it's probably the case that they're not. Like
Oh
unless
yeah.
unless you
Yeah.
unless you have some mental challenge, like physically, like you're
Yeah.
on the spectrum, or you have a physical
Yeah.
disability that
Right.
or like a drastically lower IQ. There's no reason why you can't like learn a language. You can't learn it well. It's probably your instruction or the institution that you got placed in, or whatever, however which way you've been
Yeah.
kind of exposed to it, that you've
Yeah.
developed that belief.
Or you just have some sort of negative early experience.
Exactly.
Someone who you trust tells you your language is bad or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that can be the case. I wonder, in some ways this does touch on the Ken Robinson idea, that one of the things he was pushing against was the idea that the education system primarily classifies us based on our date of manufacture, which is when we're born,
Yeah.
and doesn't take into account the differences between us in that respect. Because obviously there's also the idea that some people will mature earlier. Not all 3 year olds are the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it seems to me that what's needed there is a recognition, in the case of your school, a recognition at the sort of kindergarten level or whatever, that some kids are not ready for the certain regimentation of sit down and read this.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, there needs to be like a staging. So for them, they need something else.
Mm-hmm.
They need something else. Now, I guess their answer, or what I don't know if this is what they're proposing. As you said, they didn't come with any proposal, but is it that their answer is that, well, you should take him out of school and do this with him at home until he's ready? Is that is
No,
that
I
where they're
don't.
going?
It was just kind of like they're just kind of give it. They gave us, I guess, a state of the union, and we're like, well, is there anything that we can do with
I
that?
see.
And they're like, I'm like, well, it was one of the things that we were concerned, that he would be ready to do it.
Yeah.
And it's now something that we've kind of got to navigate. And
Right.
we're aware of it, so we're working on it at home, and hopefully,
Yeah.
we'll have the funds in the future to kind of put him in or go to activities outside of school that will help with development of more discipline minded, like something like a martial art or a sport that will kind of
Uh-huh.
that has that kind of you've got to kind of focus and keep um, uh, do a lot of repetitions of the same thing if you're wanting to kind
Uh-huh.
of achieve and progress.
Yeah, I like the idea of a state of a union. That's
Yeah,
what they should call parent-teacher meetings.
yeah, and it's funny how the it felt like it was almost sometimes it felt a little bit like almost like a plea. It's just like, look, wait, there's not really, is that what how is he at home, and like they're looking for a solution to it, and I think the solution is he just needs to be a bit more further along and a little bit older, a little bit more mature.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure that there are any ways to kind of super speed that, or something that you can actively do to do it. Like it reminds me of when they were really young, and we'd get nurses come round and we get material through the post about milestones, and um, Fanny was like, "Oh, they need to get to this next milestone." I'm like, "That's not how milestones work. They're just kind of signposts to let us know, you know,
Right.
are they kind of on course, on track,
Right.
for
You
where
can't
they're
you can't
on."
sort of push them to the next developmental milestone.
No, you can't. I mean, you know, it's you learn and you develop as in your own time. I don't know. There's ways to
Mm.
super speed that. I mean, they're very useful in that we can kind of be like, oh, this is something that we should practice. Like rather than trying to get the kid to walk, making sure that they can stand and scoot, and what do they call it, where they go from side to side. They don't walk, but they hold on to something.
Shuffle,
I
is
can't
it?
remember what it's called. It's got a word for it. It could be shuffle, but doing
Uh-huh.
that sort of thing gives you some ideas. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know how
Okay.
that works for kids with school. Maybe there does need to be new weight class, a new area between nursery, daycare, and
It's not
kindergarten,
well,
or what?
it's also the idea of a flexible weight class. It's also the idea of not only judging kids by their date of birth, but judging them as their development, having a bit more flexibility with it.
Yeah.
So a kid arrives who might be 3, 4, or 5, and you make some sort of assessment as to their, as you say, their current kind of developmental progress, their current milestones.
Hmm.
And then we say, okay, so this kid can't sit still for 2 seconds and doesn't want to sit and autonomously read. So they should be, we'll keep them in this other thing. Of course, it's very difficult to do in practice. It's neither of our specialities really.
Hmm.
And so I can imagine all sorts of problems you would have where, you know, the kind of early stages might be seen as the fun groups. Oh, why do they get to have all the fun? They're always playing with Lego and stuff, whereas us in the 5 year, the more the mature group, we have to sit down and read or something. So you'd have to have some way to balance it so that it comes the because we are seeing it as a progression, and so the more, let's say, the students who have progressed more to this kind of later stage of maturity, it has to come with some sort of responsibility that's going to make them feel, kids love it when they're kind of, oh, now you've got your captain's hat or something. So you might need something like that as well.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to talk to someone who's really a specialist in this to know where they go with it.
Yeah, if you're out there, you're listening, and you're like, "Oh, I've got a skin in this game," let us know in the comments below, and we'll follow up with you, catch up with you. We'd love to hear your perspective. But yeah, well, we do what we can. I try to grade. Like I know where he's at with what he's reading, what he's learning, and we'll talk about stuff, and I'll try and grade it to kind of what I feel like where he's at,
Mm.
not just in terms of like education, but how long can we focus on talking about something like this before he gets bored or whatever. You know, often the time
Ah,
it's
so you're trying to kind of push the limits of his attention span and stuff.
yeah, not just having a set time, but like, okay, we spent a bit more time on it today than we did the other day, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do like the phonics awareness. Um, it's good though. One thing that I really like, and with the writing, is it's so fun. Um, with the not like
Ah.
writing sentences, but like the letters. So all the letters that they have, they're all within the design of like an animal. So like you've got the
Ah.
an octopus. It might not necessarily be an O, but like it will, to recognize the word, it's in the shape of an animal. So there'll be like a K, for example, and that's kind of like the octopus, and the main part is the octopus, and then the kicking K is the legs, the squid legs going out or something like that. You know what I mean? So when they're tracing it, they're drawing an animal. So it's kind of it. So then almost like they're not really drawing a particular drawing the letter. They're just kind of drawing the animal, but they've got that muscle memory of doing it. It's kind of like Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off.
That sounds really clever.
Yeah, I was really
Yeah, I
impressed
mean
by that.
that stuff's great though, and it's just from my perspective, it's just engagement. It's barely even attached to the idea of it just happens to be within the realm of phonics, but it's just that they've brought in some personalization, the animals, the context, and as you say, it's fun, so it's engaging. So it's just bringing engagement into the teaching of it.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
So talk to me a bit about phonics then. What else?
so they go through basically they go through the alphabet initially, and it's just the case of getting the kids to recognize and identify letters to begin with. It's really really simple, and then they start to combine the letters, and go over uh, the different sounds that they start to make when you combine them, and that's kind of where he's at now. um, and then putting them into, I think they do all the letters first, the sounds of the letters, identifying and recognizing, starting to put letters together, and then they start to go into words, and then yeah, that's more or less that they're at the stage at now.
Have you noticed any differences in his reading ability or in the way he speaks?
Yeah, but I'm not sure how much I can attribute that to school,
Yeah.
or with learning the phonics and being more aware of that. He can say that, like, he loves to point out or talk about, like, when we first started talking about letters, they would use letters, and then they would point out words that start with that letter. So like, he would say, C, what word starts with C? Cat. Can you think of more? And I'd be like, oh, chimp. And he'd be like, what's that? And I'm like, no, what about cow? And he's like, oh yes, that's a good answer, because he tries to emulate what they do, and he will teach
Ah,
you back,
I
and that's
see, I
kind of
see.
an
That's good.
interaction. It's like him taking the
Wow.
the emulating and taking that role responsibility, which he
Just
really
shows you
enjoys.
how important teachers are, though, doesn't it? I mean, they're having that much of an effect on your kid,
Hmm.
where your kid will emulate them.
Yeah,
It's
especially at
like
this age. Yeah.
so important. Yeah.
And I think it's definitely, modeling is super important with parenting. And one of the hallmarks, especially with learning to regulate emotions, is mirroring. So when when you see a kid being sad or upset, frustrated, like you kind of try and express that in your face. You express, oh, you're feeling really sad. What happened? Oh, you dropped your ice cream. Oh, that's awful. And like you kind of
Right.
empathize, and then you try to demonstrate a way out of that.
Right.
Yeah, you'd be
Like,
like,
oh wow, look at that elephant.
not
Oh,
a
you dropped your ice
distraction.
cream. That sucks. Oh, not distraction.
Not
Ah,
distraction.
okay.
No, you sit in it. Be like, oh no, oh, what can we do? Ah, can we see if there's more ice cream? No, there's no more ice cream. Oh, is there something else that we can do right now? Is there other snack that we can have? Like starting to think of other options, to fill whatever they were doing at that time. iPad runs out of battery, and be like, oh no, the
Yeah.
iPad's run out of battery. We can't watch
Mm.
any more, little Einsteins. Well, we can. What we have to do? What do we have to do? Oh, we've got to plug it in, and we can still have fun. What else can we do that's fun? It's like the Mr. Rogers thing. With what do you do with the
So,
mad that you feel?
so how? Yes. How would you define a distraction versus like an alternative activity that you don't consider a distraction? So then you give the example then as like doing something else that's fun. So presumably that wouldn't be a distraction because it still fulfills the kind of aim of having fun. Is
I
that
I
the
guess I guess
idea?
the yes, that, but having that mirroring stage seems to be key. So having that
Right.
acknowledgement of
Okay.
this was a really sad moment, or this is the moment that you're really
Yeah.
mad at, rather than going, oh, don't be sad, here's another ice
Yeah.
cream, or here's a
Right.
lollipop. Yeah.
I see. I see. Right. 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 Right.
And
Yeah.
and also modeling is very important. Being able to, a lot of, I think, with parenting is actually doing lot of reflection on yourself and how you regulate yourself and manage situations, because there are times where it is incredibly frustrating, and I and Fanny have like been short, or uh wouldn't shout, we don't shout, but just kind of like, no,
Yeah.
but like with
Blunt.
okay, so like say it's my youngest is doing something, it's a little bit dangerous, I'd be like, no, don't do that, or whatever, and then I'll go in the kitchen, and my youngest will do that again, and then my oldest will do the same. you know
Oh, he'll say like, "No, don't do that."
yeah, and I'm like,
Right.
damn it, I should have
I'm like,
said, I should have framed it more in a positive way, rather than going, don't do that, and like say something like, stay stay I'm not stay safe, but you normally have to be more specific. So instead of saying, be careful, it'd be like, listen to your body.
right.
Do you feel stable? Do you feel
Right.
secure? But in a more graded way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that must be really tough with like really young kids.
It's really tough, and often you kind of like, oh, it's my language a little bit. It's often feels easier to say don't, and just say don't be
Yeah.
careful, because it feels shorter and easier for them to understand, but they understand more than they can produce
Right.
initially. It's very similar to language learning.
Yeah. Ah, yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, you've done a lot of reading on this subject. So where does this specific idea come from? The idea of sort of um I don't know. It's all because you've spoken to it before as being like it's almost like you're training their subconscious and you
Hmm.
want them to have like kind of a subconscious that they can rely on in the future. It's
Hmm.
like the voice of your parents is actually kind of your trained subconscious in the future.
Hmm.
So you want a good subconscious that kind of works for you rather than works against you, right?
Yeah.
So all of this stuff presumably is linked. Where does that come from?
Well, there's a broad range of like books that I've read, and a
Right.
lot, from being background with the teacher and teaching stuff is very applicable. And I guess there's Piaget was the big, the main guy when when you're talking
Is
about
that the
kind of
zone of
development.
proximal development?
I think maybe he was part of it. He's the one that kind of
Right.
put kids into like tiers, like they're in this stage to then go into this stage. I'll see if I can
Right.
find something Piaget.
I know it's
Erickson.
Vygotsky did the zone of proximal development, but I think he's often talked about in the same breath as Piaget, isn't he?
Yes. Eric Erickson went on to go a little bit further with some of his stuff, and I believe Eric Erickson was also like a mentor or an adjacent to Margaret McFarland, who was the psychologist that not psychologist, but developmental children's developmental authority that Mr. Rogers was very close friends
Ah,
with. Yeah, and a lot of it is to do with this new movement that I subscribe to called authoritative parenting.
okay.
Some really digestible material is like Little Big Feelings, really like those guys, and it's this idea of kind of like middling. You before you would have these authoritarian parents that it's just kids should be seen, not heard. Do this
Right.
super
Tell them what
strict.
to do.
Yeah,
Do that or
exactly.
else.
And
Yeah.
then there was the opposite side of that, which is being too permissive, where the
Yeah.
kids do whatever they want, and like, oh, you don't want to eat that, let me make you something else to eat. Kind of having a middle ground where you're trying to be a person that
Yeah.
directs them and kind of giving them a certain amount of agency without putting them in danger. You know what I mean? So try and take those
Find it very
moments.
very interesting. The name though, you called it authoritative parenting.
Yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting name, isn't it? Does that mean authoritative as in it gives kind of autonomy, it gives control to the, what does it mean exactly? The parents are,
Authoritative is that you are the the figure, the mentor, that helps direct the kids, of how to kind of negotiate the world. Like you're almost like their voice of going. Like say they want to go outside and they express that, and you want to go outside, and instead of saying, okay, you're going outside, you need this, this, and this, and this, you initially start by saying, oh, you want to go outside, okay, well, what do we need before we go outside, and kind of see
yeah.
what they would get, what they would say to that, and you respond to that, and you'd be like, oh, well, look, let's look outside. Oh, it's raining, it's sunny. Oh, it looks cold outside. And
Right.
like then you'd be like, oh, maybe make some suggestions. Should we, what kind of, or not even say, should we put on a jacket? Be like, what kind of jacket do you want to, should we wear?
Right. It almost, yeah, that's interesting, that one, because that reminds me a little bit of like ICQs in teaching,
Yeah.
like instruction checking questions, where you kind of want to balance the amount of options that you're giving, because obviously if you give too much, it becomes like too much of a difficult question.
Hmm.
Like if we take a CCQ for example, where you've taught something, let's say the present perfect, and then you just kind of say, right, Maria, what's the present perfect? It's like, that's too much,
Hmm.
right? What you want to say is like, Maria, do we use the present perfect to talk about finished events in the past or about things that relate to the present or whatever, right? So it's like you give those kind of options.
Yeah.
So it's like you were saying, it's not like what should we wear? It's more like, how warm do we need to be?
Yeah.
Is it the big coat or the medium coat?
Yeah.
Because you don't want them to be like, well, we're fine like this, you know. Just
But
go
you know
outside with
that
nothing.
that it's actually good, really, learning opportunities when you can do it in a place where you kind of make give those options, and if they say no to none of them, to allow them to discover consequences, natural consequences. So I've done
Mm.
that with them before, where they like, I don't want to wear shoes. And I'm like, okay, let's go out. And it's just rained outside, and I'm like, my socks are wet. I'm like, well, what? Yeah, they are wet. Why do you think they're wet? And I'm like, well, we've got no shoes on. I'm like, yeah. Well, what do you need? Oh, I need some shoes. But your socks are wet too. And they're like, oh, I need socks too. And it works on another, many other levels. Always having a it kind of always reminds me a little bit of like improv, because you're always kind of it's always this principle of always saying yes, but there's caveats to it. To be like, oh, uh, say they don't want to leave the playground, and you go, oh, I see you don't want to leave the playground, and it's really hard because playgrounds are a lot of fun, um, but we're going. Do you want to walk to the car, or do you want me to pick you up? So you're always kind of like
Uh-huh.
embracing the situation, acknowledging it, and then adding to it,
So
but these
there is a bit of
constraints. There are constraints.
there is some idea of a spoonful of sugar.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right.
We're gonna
Interesting.
punish you. Do you want the mace, or do you want the samurai? This will
I
be your
see.
demise.
Giving
Is it
some
tea cake or
autonomy.
death?
Interesting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, one of the things that I noticed with the teachers, I'm not sure how much. I don't feel like they have as much authority. It's really interesting. Like it felt like when we were having these meetings that they're kind of, what can you do? What do you do? Like, what can you do to help? And I'm like, oh, interesting. I wonder what they do for discipline, because I don't think that they do kind of like they sit on the naughty chair, or the like.
Yeah, I think that's definitely that sort of stuff's definitely discouraged.
So I'm wondering how they deal with that, you know, uh, undisciplined kids.
Yeah. Um yeah, I mean the book, I think from my perception of working in private schools, the book often does stop with the parents.
Yeah,
Ultimately you want collaboration, but you also you don't want to be doing things like sending notes home saying they're not doing this, because there is a risk of punishment. And it's not like you just want the parents to punish the kids and for them to be afraid, and therefore that's why they do it. So it is quite complicated, but the ultimate threat really is like, we have to get your parents involved.
yeah,
And that normally you just hope that that'll be the thing that kind of sorts them out, because obviously there's things beyond that, like behavioral contracts and stuff like that. But at Wynn's age, that wouldn't make sense.
yeah,
But yeah, it's definitely there's some sort of a balancing act going on there between the parents and the teachers for sure.
yeah. Well, we talk to them regularly. In Fanny has a meeting with the new teacher today, and it does feel collaborative. But I was I was not expecting to be as collaborative. I thought it would be more kind of like, this is what we're doing. You can do this at home as well to supplement, but it kind of feels
Uh-huh.
like, what are you doing? We're doing
Yeah.
we're doing this, but what are you doing as well? And they'll be like, is so how can we work it so we work together? I'm like, no, it's fine. It's just kind of a little bit unexpected.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And but yeah, the back to the back to the phonics. It's been interesting just kind of seeing him identifying words, and we try and take as many opportunities as we can to uh, celebrate when he sees letters or he recognizes words. Sounding out words is also interesting, because a lot of it does take a lot of concentration and remembering. And like I said, I'm not sure how he's ready developmentally for that, but the way that they seem to do it is more or less what I was doing when I was teaching really young kids, and just finding fun and interesting ways to engage with letters, to notice letters, to play around with words, um,
Mm.
to make new words. Uh, yeah, and they seem to try and build as well, which I really like. It seems like from one thing that they learn to the other, it's built upon, and it's not just kind of like randomly thrown together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, the curriculum
Hmm.
of sort of the phonics learning is very well established, and that's what I mean when I say it's kind of a hot topic. I feel like a lot has gone into phonics recently,
Hmm.
and it's come from the native side, and now it's coming into language learning.
Hmm.
And I think there have been interesting stages as well, because I know there was an attempt at teaching English phonemically in the 70s, which failed horribly. And there was like a whole generation of kind of illiterate kids because they tried to teach it phonemically.
Hmm.
But now phonics it's a different way of teaching it. And that accounts for the idiosyncrasies of the language, I suppose. The fact that the language ultimately spelling only makes a bit of sense, not a lot of sense.
It's it's funny because we English gets held up just because it's the most widely spoken language by lots of different nationalities, yada 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 yada. But I feel like sometimes it's held up as like almost this is the best language, and I really don't think it is. And I think that's one of the stumbling blocks that you see is with phonics. It's so difficult to
Uh-huh.
to read, to learn to read. To you can't just have the phonemics, and I think people should probably be taught phonemics alongside phonics as well, just so they can kind of better, especially second language speakers, so they can better like say the words, because often you can maybe sound out the letters, say words, but you might be saying it with your pre-existing idea of what those letters represent or have those sounds, so it
Yeah.
comes out not entirely English,
Yeah.
accented to the point
I
where
mean,
you can't understand
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I love phonemics. I love the phonemic sounds, and I think even if you don't use the symbols, then I think it's pretty critical for a language teacher to have an awareness of the phonemics.
Hmm.
It was groundbreaking for me, really. It was definitely there was definitely a shift in my mind when I realized that we have all these, that they represent the sounds, and that's how many sounds we have in the language. And just to have a discrete way of representing those sounds in my mind when I'm teaching,
Hmm.
I found to be helpful, rather than just making kind of a noise to the students and then they make a noise back and you kind of go, yeah, sort of. But now, if you actually have this discrete map in your head, you know where the boundaries need to be, as in, you know that R needs to sound different than or,
Hmm.
because you know the phonemics, that those are two distinct phonemics, and therefore they are important for distinguishing minimal pairs. So I like that, and I like it a lot. But I am very interested in phonics, and I see phonics from my perspective as someone who's really into phonemics. I see phonics as being essentially, it's the an emphasis on the sound spelling relationship side of phonemics,
Hmm.
which is less emphasized in phonemics, but occasionally you will see it in textbooks and so on, where they'll say that, these letters can sometimes be this sound and sometimes be that sound, and then you have to categorize them and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So it kind of touches on it, whereas phonics really comes from that that kind of grapheme perspective of this is the, because as far as I know, a grapheme is a unit. It's a group of letters that represent a unit of sound, right? That's a grapheme.
Is it? Does it have to be? It's over three letters. Does that make it a grapheme? Because I know if it's
No, I
two
think I
letters,
think
it's like a diagraph. No.
a digraph. No, a grapheme's all of them. So a
Oh,
grapheme
it's
would
the
be a
encompassing of all the
monograph, a
different.
digraph.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it could be verb, consonant, two vowels together, consonant, vowel, consonant,
yeah.
consonant. Okay, okay.
So I believe that a digraph would just be like two letters that represent one sound. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like O for ooh or something,
Yeah. Or like
or CK
sk
for k.
sk. Oh, we did. Jinx. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Right.
Yeah, so I can absolutely see the advantage of that, and it does seem to be. I mean, people are so excited about it. Obviously, it does seem to be working.
I feel like it's
As to go,
still a it's the best um method, best it's the best way to do, I guess, the letters and reading and words, but it's not great because it's still there's still all these caveats to it, which is why we have all the phonemic chart, which really actually identifies and properly allows you to say the correct pronunciation. Whereas I kind of feel like phonics, it's just like, okay, there's got to be an easier way to do phonemics that we or where we use the letters that we already have. But it's still there's always
right.
but it's just English, so there's always exceptions. There's always going to be a diagraph that just doesn't sound that way, or you put it together in a word and it changes.
Yeah, I think I do think that you're being a bit harsh on English by talking about it as being English, because I think you'll find that basically all languages have problems. They
Hmm.
might just be different problems. Yes, we might have something like Spanish, which is more phonetic, but it's not phonetic. An example there would be when you get a double D, like DID in
Hmm.
Madrid. I never used to realize this, but like Madrid, they don't say it as Madrid. They say Madrid with like a th
Hmm.
sound. And that is the kind of standard way of saying it. It's how most of them say it. So there are like weird exceptions. And the V at the start of words sounds different than the V in the middle of words. Again, it's something I never used to realize until later on.
Hmm.
So that has exceptions as well. So even in phonetics, which is where Spanish is kind of easy, so to speak, but
Hmm.
Spanish has got other problems. So natural languages always have problems, and we have to remember the attempt at making sense of languages was Esperanto.
Mm.
And where's that? Where's
Yeah.
all the people speaking Esperanto, you know? So yeah, I don't think you can take the I don't think you can take the chaos out of languages. I think it's more a case of just embracing it. And English is as good as anything else to embrace it.
Yeah. It's just, I guess it's more of my frustration with languages in general, in that it always feels like you're trying to put on a framework onto the language. You're trying to explain and partly, and you just can't. Like, it's languages emerged, uh, and then much, much, much later on, thousands and thousands of years, we're trying to go, okay, so this is how it is, and like, we put all these we put all these letters on top, and it's just like layers and layers and layers, but it just kind of feels like, oh, we should just start again. Let's just scrap it all and build it up in a logical way.
I can totally understand that. And I think that's an issue that many people have. And actually, funnily enough, I think that kind of plays into something that we've touched on recently, which is why has like sort of additive grammar based teaching stuck so hard? And I think it's partly that. It's partly that people just find it really kind of icky and unpleasant to just accept that languages are a mess and you have to just deal with them as they are. They want to draw the square, and the nice clean lines.
Yeah.
And it's like once it gets messy, it's like you'd rather buy a new notebook than work with the notebook that's already messed up. I understand it. But I think actually the best way to deal with that is to try to, as much as possible, overcome the urge to want to do that and just work with it. There's
Yeah,
other because
it's
there's certainly other ways where you can concentrate your because it basically I think it comes out of a drive for quality. They want to make something quality, and they think that because it's the rules don't work, then that means it's not quality. But there's other areas of looking for quality. Anyway, sorry, go on.
um no, I think that there's it's the think what is it, think fast, oh, thinking fast and slow, the Daniel Kahneman. um it's him. I think that I got the idea of, you know people are just like these, predisposed to just seeing patterns and wanting to make sense. And yeah, I think that's what's happening with languages and with doing grammar. We're just like, there's got to be a unifying theory of how and it's not. It's just a convoluted mess, and we're just doing the best that we can. And some brilliant people out there have come up with phonics and grammar, but it's not a be all and end all. It is, you just got to work with what you've got to work with.
Mm.
And yeah, I agree with you 100%. You do have to go, here are the cards that I've been handed, this is what I can play with, and just take it from there, and just accept that, all right, you didn't know this, you didn't know this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think. Yeah, just accept that there's always going to be a bit of mess in there,
Yeah, I think
and
this
that and
it
that
goes
and that
far
really
beyond
is it.
languages as well. When you're dealing with other people, and you're dealing with just life in general, right? You never, that or whole chestnut with, like, oh, you know when certain sects of people are like, oh, that you need to find a girl that's a virgin. There's purity there, or you need a guy that's this or whatever. And like if someone has a bad moment and they shout at you, yeah, or what have you, that you're like, that's it. No, they're dead forever. It's not like that. We're in a
Yeah,
really incredibly messy world with messy people, and there's no
that's
clear
it.
way to manage all of this. But the
Yeah.
only you do have to manage it if you want to live in this world together, right?
Yeah, people always want to start again, don't they? It's easier to start again than to fix the thing, you know? I mean, I don't know. That's certainly
Yeah,
my perspective anyway, you know. I noticed this for myself as a gamer that and I play lots of like management and strategy games. And if things become a mess, I always want to hit that new game button. You know, I just want to be like, oh, it's messy. Just start over. But ultimately, that always sets me back because fixing something actually does take less time. It's kind of messy to fix stuff. Whereas when you got your blank slate, you know, it just seems to be easier, cleaner. Yeah. This time we can do everything perfect,
yeah,
you know? So yeah, and it's something I think it's better if we try to get over that tendency to want to do it, especially with languages.
yeah. And I think it's I see it with my young kids when they're learning, learning to read, learning to write, or just learning in general. They're just like, why? And you can kind of see in their head that it's not making sense, and it's kind of your responsibility to go, yeah, it doesn't make sense. That's just how it is, and they just thought, why?
So they say why, and you go, "That's right."
more or less. Uh, but it's kind of part and parcel of dealing with it. Sometimes you just can't explain this stuff. Sometimes it happens. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes you're just not gonna know everything, and you're never gonna know everything, and you just kind of
Mm.
gotta accept that at some point. And what's that famous? I think actually I think it might be a religious thing where it's like give me the um, something, the strength to change the things that I can, and the I don't know if it's the strength to accept the things that I cannot. Something like that. I find that to be quite true.
Yeah, that's right. It's a prayer in the New Testament. Yeah, something like it's give me the
Wisdom.
give me yeah, that's right. There's three things. There's give me the patience to accept the things I can't change, the strength to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes, there we
Yeah.
go. I think that's a great place to end this little chat. Unless you have anything further you want to add.
No, but it has been very interesting to talk about this. I feel like we should probably do a few more things on maybe kind of early learners and childhood learning because I think you do have quite a lot to say about it, and I think it is something that would definitely interest any people with parents or teachers who teach younger learners.
Yeah, and I would love to have more teachers that deal with young learners, or even just child development experts on to kind of pair with our knowledge with pedagogy and teaching. And we've talked about looking at a series of different pedagogical techniques, because one of the things that I found when I was reading about how best to raise your child or teach your child or what have you, that there is an interesting contrast between the language learning industry and the early learning industry, because they're, like we've covered all these different pedagogical methodologies. Early learning has that. There's Reggio Emilia, there's Montesini, there's Strong Start, there's a whole bunch that focus on many different things. Waldorf method.
Oh yeah.
And we both visited, how do you pronounce it, in Switzerland, where we went to? The big
Oh yeah. The was it? Oh, it's something like the
Gothenheim. Yeah, Steiner.
Yeah.
He came up with the Waldorf.
Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, he came up with the Waldorf method, which is heavily focused on taking kids out into nature and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
So maybe we should cover that at some point. If you're listening to that and you're interested, let us know in the comments below, or we won't touch it. Well, we probably will touch it. We like to touch things under the covers. That's how we get those crumbs on the sheets.
That's right. Oh, there we go. We got the answer. We come full circle.
If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/ProfesorRich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click off. Thank you.
Bye.